Hey, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of the Spiritual Populist podcast.
Episode 2, welcome.
We made it. Last week was kind of just a general overview of the concept of spiritual populism, and this week I think we're going to try to start to get into what our normal, regular format is going to be. For those of you who don't understand yet exactly what's going on at www.thespiritualpopulist.com, we are starting to set up an aggregate news channel. You can go to the QR code on the top if that's your thing, and that'll take you straight there.
Right, if you're now, one of those newfangled millennials and stuff like that.
Newfangled types, yeah. It's kind of complicated for some of us, but but you can check it out. Right now, what we've got up there is just a sign-up page. Basically, you can sign up for the newsletter, and once we get things going, then you'll get notified right away. But coming up pretty soon, we're going to start having basically lots of different articles from your favorite news sources from a spiritual populist perspective. We provide you a summary of what the content provided is about, and then of course the link to the original content if you want to read the longer article or if you want to watch the podcast or whatever it is. So it'll be a one-stop shop. Every day there'll be several new articles posted. We'll keep up with the news cycle, and then every week we'll have this podcast where we'll pick the 2 or 3 or 4 biggest news episodes of the week, and we'll do a deep dive into the topics from a spiritual populist perspective. So
yeah, absolutely. It's like these days there's just so much going on, and there are so many different news publications, and honestly, there's a lot of people that represent this spiritual populist mindset that we're trying to promote here. Again, whether they identify as spiritual populist or not. And so, kind of having a central hub where you can kind of get all the consolidation of all the news for the week that's happening, and not have to go to 20 different sources to kind of get the breakdown. Well, we think it'd be really valuable. So we're excited to be able to offer that to you guys and to do this podcast every week. So thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we wanted to start doing this just to recap a little bit about what we talked about last week, the idea of spiritual populism, which is that there are a lot of us out there. Basically, we are all defining populism as people, rather than using the left-right paradigm, the divide and conquer paradigm, I think as a lot of us see it, where it's kind of just set up to fail. People choose a side, they argue. Nothing ever really gets done except for the corrupt criminals in Washington, D.C. End up making more and more money and basically manufacture consent for whatever new war they've got concocted or new land grab, or, what we would see as, I think, the typical machinations of a colonizing empire. And so spiritual populism, well, then the backlash to this, theoretically, according to the mainstream, would be being a sort of a Christian conservative, MAGA patriot populist. And that's, I think, what a lot of people think of when they think of the concept of populism. But as we like to say here at the Spiritual Populist, there are a lot of potentially mushroom-eating anarchists and other types.
Guilty. I'm guilty as charged.
And others. There's others too who might be a spiritual populist, but who don't really feel a connection to that Christian conservative movement or these patriot movements that are more kind of typically constitutionalist or Protestant oriented. So, what you're going to get at the spiritual populist is a lot of alternative perspectives, Eastern philosophy perspectives, even hopefully more indigenous perspectives. Because I found at least in my exploration of the world as I know it, that these pre-colonized or decolonized or uncolonized peoples, traditional cultures from around the world, they all have the same basic principles as most of even the Christian conservative populists, which is that they believe that there are natural laws in the universe and that people do have natural rights and that there is individual sovereignty. We should be respecting people's individual sovereignty, just as adults, to make choices for themselves as long as they're not impacting anyone else. So, at least from our point of view, you're going to get a voluntarist perspective that people should be free to be who they are and only use violence in terms of self-defense rather than proactive violence that we usually get from government and corporate actors trying to impose a certain lifestyle or a certain product or whatever it may be, a certain morality on top of a life that you should be able to freely choose. If you're not bothering anybody else, I mean, why does anybody else care? But unfortunately,
Absolutely.
live in.
It's the golden rule, as we alluded to last week, just the typical golden rule sort of thing,
Right.
And yeah, the voluntarism is a critical component, as well as just the notion of decentralization. One of the core reasons we're experiencing the suffering across the planet that we're undergoing right now is because there are a small handful of people who are trying to centralize control of all the world's resources and power into their own hands to be able to exert their will over the rest of us. And so that's definitely one of the core themes is decentralization versus centralization, as well as bottom-up approaches versus top-down approaches, which is closely related to that. But the notion being like, anytime that any problem is put forth by the government, whether it be, regardless how you feel about any of these things, whether it be like a pandemic or, climate change or pollution or whatever the problem might be, violence, whatever the problem is, they always have a top-down approach that they want to shove down our throat, an approach that gives them more power and that leads to our exploitation.
Absolutely.
So that's another one of the dynamics. It's going to be a common theme that runs through everything that we cover here is just, again, top down versus bottom up approaches, like, a bottom up approach being something like cryptocurrency, for example, where you're talking about having a free market where people can create solutions and put it out there and see if people like and resonate with that solution, see if it actually solves problems. And when it does, then it's adopted by the people, one person at a time, and not forced down by some nanny state.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that comes to mind as you're talking about that is the way that these top-down approaches are constantly trying to manufacture consent. And that got me thinking about another characteristic in the left-right paradigm. So many people want to say, it's like the government is on one side, the corporations are on the other side. The solution is like some compromise between this left-right paradigm. But from the point of view of the top-down paradigm, what I see at the top is what I call the corporate government complex. And the corporate government complex is always trying to engage in these kinds of manufacturing consent over certain, whatever the topic of the day is, where they are trying to convince people to allow them to centralize power at the top to deal with the problem that they're putting out there. And so the corporate government media apparatus is really just designed to do just this. It's designed to manufacture consent. It's PR campaigns, marketing campaigns, really, when you're looking at corporate or government news. They're working together to provide you with a mainstream narrative that provides you potentially with a left and a right, but never really analyzes things from the top down. And so that's what we're going to be giving you at the spiritualpopulist.com. Are going to be news sources from the perspective of an understanding that we've got a very corrupt top of a hierarchy that are manufacturing consent to the masses at the bottom, but they're not really giving you the real information. And that's the information that you're going to get at the website, which that information will clearly explain exactly how what we're really looking at is a corrupt government corporate system that's imposing a lot of social engineering onto the rest of us, manufacturing consent for this engineering as we move forward. And that we're not really living in a world where we've got this. I mean, it's almost a fantasy world, isn't it, Leandrew, where people think that, well, we all just vote and then the democracy figures it out in this incredible way, and it works out great for all of us, right? I mean,
Yeah, it's
which never
complete
seems to
nonsense.
happen.
It's complete nonsense, and it doesn't actually work out like that. And even if it did, that's not exactly an ideal scenario. Like, even if we had a completely, like, straightforward democracy, and there was no lobbying, there was no corporate personhood or any of these other things that muddy the
Right.
water. The notion that 51% of the people get to exert their will by force over 49% of people, that's not a good idea. That's not a good idea, because that's going to end up resulting in the vast majority of the time the people are going to be forced and coerced upon, right? And being forced to live in a way they don't want to live. And like I mentioned in the last episode, it just creates this fight for the throne when you have such an established system of force and coercion that is legitimized through this process of democracy. You're creating a throne that just results in civil discord and all the sort of polarization that we're seeing today.
Yeah.
So
I've never really understood the people that seem to fantasize that democracy somehow, just an unchecked democracy, is the best way to run a society. And I always ask the question, well, what if 51% vote to simply exterminate the other 49%? Then is that okay? And then it's always like, well, no, of course that's not okay. Well, then it's like, and that's where democracy really fails, right? I mean, you have to have you have to limit the power of even the democracy. But it is amazing how many people really feel like, if you're in a group, then 51% can decide what 49% do. Without any checks or balances on that action. And it's so ingrained in people's minds that they don't really contemplate what the results will be, and that we have to have a more nuanced, I think we like this term, nuanced approach. Because I guess Leandrew and I have talked about this off camera, but the concept of having nuance, it always seems, so often we get in political arguments where people are thinking very black and white. And, black and white thinking is actually a psychological term. It's typically something that people get stuck into when they're in some kind of a toxic relationship. And I think that's what we see so often in our political discourse these days, especially on social media, is that people just get stuck inside this black and white thinking. They're yelling back and forth, but they're not having the nuanced conversations that really result in living in a just society, in a healthy society, in a healthy community. So we're trying to facilitate that here on the Spiritual Populist, and hopefully we'll maintain.
Hopefully we maintain that. And you're not always going to agree with everything we say, and I think that's just fine and just great. I think that's another thing that we really want to celebrate here, is like a true diversity of thought, right? A true diversity of thought, like, in my ideal world, and I think in Doug's too, we want to see a decentralized world where people are free to live according to their differing worldviews, and where we simply do not infringe upon each other's ability to do so, right?
Yeah.
So whether you're like more socialist or communist minded, or more like like capitalist minded, or whether you're more socially conservative or more socially liberal, and all of those sorts of things, I think it's just important that we try to find some common ground where we can make changes to the world that allows us each to live according to our own like code, right? And there's a lot of people that agree with your code, and so you should be able to align with those people and live in that way. So
yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I don't know if you want to kind of kickstart things with the Dominion issue.
Sure.
Talking about all this left and right shenanigans.
I know, right? So probably one of the bigger news stories that came across our table this week is, of course, the Dominion Election Systems has been suing Fox News. And this, of course, opens up the whole January 6th can of worms. So Leandrew and I can take a real hard look at this craziness. But of course, Fox, I guess, for probably about, I don't even know how long, maybe about a month after the election, maybe a few months after the election, was going with the narrative that there was something wrong with the election. There were questions that needed to be answered. And of course, this was called fake news by the mainstream. And they were really hammered for it. And then eventually Dominion, the election systems, the people that produce most of the electronic voting machines that people are having questions about, decided they were going to sue Fox News. So we were all waiting patiently because we were hoping that within the discovery process of this trial, we might be able to see exactly how does Dominion work and what's going on with our election systems. But unfortunately, it seems like they've decided to settle out of court now. So
you knew they weren't going to let that happen. You can't have the evidence actually be brought forth and explored.
This is a real classic. I mean, this issue for me is something that I started questioning the election integrity in the United States with the 2004 election, because, you know, I've always been a very political person. And, you know, first of all, in 2000, as many of you will recall, the Al Gore, George Bush election was super close, got down to Florida. And then there was this hanging Chads issue. I always thought it was really interesting that Jeb Bush, George Bush's brother, happened to be governor at the time of Florida. So I'm sure that didn't sway anything one way or the other. But that ended up going to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ended up saying that that George Bush did in fact win. Now that, to my mind, was just completely squirrely. Who the hell knows what Chads were hanging where? And, you know, from the news reports, it just seemed like the election was kind of a butt show. Nobody really knew what was going on. It was a situation that was actually really interesting because Al Gore at first, you know, kind of grumbled and then quickly backpedaled, which has happened every single time there's a election issue. Rather than having a serious debate about the election integrity system, how there can be improvements, what may have really gone on. The loser, once the mainstream has decided who the winner is, the loser just immediately backs away. And it was kind of implicit, actually, that if the loser tried to complain about the election systems, then they would be called a sore loser, right? And everybody would beat up against them and just, you just lost, which is, of course, what we saw when Trump did stand up against it. But anyway, so that was 2000. By 2004, I thought, my God, Kerry's going to win by a landslide, because these guys were inventing fabrications to go to war in Iraq. That was pretty clear for a lot of us even back then. The manufacture of consent, there were never any weapons of mass destruction. They never proved any of that. It was all over the news. There was a time there where 50% of the people thought that Saddam Hussein was affiliated with Al-Qaeda and had something to do with 9/11, because subconsciously the propaganda was trying to link 9/11, of course, with Iraq. Because why were we attacking Iraq? Why was the United States government wanting to attack Iraq when it had nothing to do with 9/11? It was using 9/11 as just an excuse to go invade another country. I mean,
as they always do.
Right. I mean, it just never, if you can take a step back from the barrage of the media, the propaganda attacks, you can see how clearly absurd it is on the face of it. But we get so caught up because it's all over the media, and then you're arguing against the propaganda, but nothing ever changes. I mean, it's so frustrating. But anyway, I thought Kerry was going to win. Little did I know that George Bush had passed, I think in 2002, I think it was called the HAVA Act, the American Voters Act, Help America Vote Act. And this funneled billions of dollars into these, back then, the newfangled electronic voting machines. And the company back then was called Diebold. It wasn't Dominion, but Diebold Machines. And they had flooded the market with these Diebold machines, had the 2004 election, and just amazingly, George Bush wins. I think it went down to the state of Ohio, actually. And then eventually, I mean, there was a lawsuit that was brought about the Ohio election. The person who was apparently a whistleblower, I can't remember the guy's name right now, but he was going to testify in that lawsuit, and he had apparently been the person that had been manipulating the votes, and he died in a plane crash on the way there. So it was just a fortunate accident for the Bush administration, I guess.
Very coincidental. Yeah. Very coincidental indeed.
And after I'd followed all that, I was really like, okay. I mean, I looked into the board of directors of Diebold, and it's all generals and CIA guys, and you just start to have some pretty serious questions.
I didn't even realize until last year that Diebold became Dominion, because I remember all that stuff from way back when. And I mean, even coming around in 2008, I believe there was a whistleblower that was trying to expose that these machines were hackable, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I had no idea that Diebold had turned into Dominion. And so it's just mind blowing to see that, like, not only, I mean, I don't know that your voting machine being hackable, that there's any sort of like criminal offense that anybody should be suffering or whatever. But
yeah,
but it's just mind blowing that there's like so little repercussion, right? Like they were able to just like transform into Dominion and just continue business as usual. Presume, I mean, like, I'm sure the assumption was that these issues had been fixed, but I don't know that had ever been demonstrated. And so here we find ourselves today.
Well, and these guys have been caught in lies. They say that they're not connecting their machines up to the internet. They're not up, to modems, so they can't get hacked. But then, election integrity activists will double check and find out that, in fact, well, here's where they are connected to the internet. Here's where they could be hacked. And so, I mean, that in and of itself is kind of like, why are they lying about this? And why can't they make these systems have more integrity? As a result of my questions about electronic voting, I mean, I've interviewed for my podcast, The Shift with Doug McKenty, multiple election integrity activists. And I mean, it's wild. These machines are capable of, instead of just, one vote per person, you can make a vote be worth half a vote or 3/4 of a vote. You can adjust how much a vote is worth. A vote for one person could be worth one vote, and then a vote for another person could be worth half a vote. There's
That's
all
really
kinds of
interesting,
ways,
because then you could without like needing to alter like the actual ballots that are coming in, you could just give them a different weight. Right.
Exactly.
And so, like, yeah, if they went back and compared, I guess you would see the difference in like the totals. But it's just interesting how many different ways they have to, like, try to obfuscate what they're doing.
Right. And then they actually do make these machines capable of producing a digital ballot that's like a replica of the ballot that you actually fill in. And they could keep all of these on file. And yet in most states, they don't use this feature. They just don't use it. And it's like, well, why don't they use it? And you won't get a response. Like, they don't give an answer to why they're not using these features. So they at least have a backup digital copy of everybody's votes that they could count separate from the vote count that they get in from the voting machine company, which, the machines just tally the votes. They get a number out the end. And they say, well, this is how many people, voted. And this is who they voted for. And there are multiple steps along the way where somebody could just alter that number, and it's veritably impossible to catch people.
It's just so insane because, they have those, procedures that they could be implementing that would make things more secure, without even talking about the fact that we've had blockchain technology for over a decade that's capable of like dramatically improving this process and then ensuring that it can't be gamed. Right. But there's absolutely no interest in pursuing that sort of solution. Right. And it's like, okay, when these government institutions and when these companies like Dominion, when they don't want to pursue solutions that would make it indisputable, right, Like, what is there behind that? It's just really suspicious. Like, if you know that there's doubt about the legitimacy of your product and the legitimacy of the vote that it shows, right? Like, why would you not do everything you could to improve voter confidence?
Yeah.
Right? It
I
just makes me
just
think that, like, if you don't want to solve this problem and you don't want to take this problem seriously, is because you want that problem to exist.
Well, that's just the thing about it is I wish more people would understand this, because since Trump and since January 6th, it's become this. If you have issues with election integrity, then you're just an election denier, or you're helping Trump with this coup, or like now we're not allowed to even have conversations about election integrity. And I mean, at least there for a good while, you could clearly be censored just for bringing up these issues that are actually, like, talk to any election integrity activist and they'll be like, yeah, here are the issues in the United States that we should be thinking about because they're holes. And so I started thinking more deeply about this issue, actually. And it's not just like, did somebody steal an election? Because if somebody stole an election and you didn't catch them in the act, it's really almost impossible. Like, people today will be like, well, there was a recount in Georgia. And so that Trump was just lying about the problems that happen in Georgia, or whoever, just making it up, just election deniers because they recounted and it's all fine. It's like, well, if somebody had shuffled in 50,000 votes prior to the first count, then the recount, those 50,000 votes are still there. Like, recounting a fixed election doesn't tell you the election wasn't fixed, right?
No, that was very true.
And so anyway, the whole conversation really shouldn't be about who wins or loses a particular election and how you're gonna bust them. The conversation, the narrative, and this is what's so frustrating about the corporate government complex and their ability to control the narrative. It's like now nobody's talking about the real issue with elections, which is election integrity. Like, how much integrity is your election system have? And so hence, like, what's the percentage chance that somebody could steal this? Like,
Right. And the thing is too, like, you should want that on both sides, whether you won or whether you lost.
Right.
You should want, because if I won,
a system that
I don't want you doubting my win. If I really believe I won legitimately, I don't want you doubting that, right? And so I want election integrity for sure. And obviously, if you lost, and you want to cry for election integrity, but there's just so little. I mean, speaking of election integrity, there's so little moral and intellectual integrity being demonstrated around this entire issue. Because
That's
I mean, like, particularly in the left, and this last election, just the level of ridicule that they issued amongst everybody that had any doubts about the election, sort of thing. Like, oh, you're just an election denier and this and that. Like, a lot of those same people were all about the Russiagate hoax. They were like, they were so ready to claim that Russia had rigged the election in Trump's favor in 2016. Yeah. So you had the left claiming election interference in 2016, and of course the right denying, and then then Biden wins and it flips, and so now you have the right screaming about, like, the election fraud, and now the left like, oh, it's so immoral to doubt elections, and election deniers are dangerous, and we got to stop these people.
Right,
like,
domestic terrorists.
They're domestic terrorists. You guys were the election deniers 4 years ago. Yeah. So stop with this silliness.
Or even in 2004, the people, of course, who were complaining about the Kerry election. It's like, this is yet another example, Leandrew, of those of us who have principles. Over years, we don't change. And what's so strange is that the left-right paradigm, it'll flip-flop, depending on who they want to target or at what time for whatever. I mean, with the wars in the Middle East, it was clearly the right wing and the left wing was anti-war. Now with Ukraine, the right wing is anti-war and the left wing is pro-war, which is crazy.
Yeah. It used to be a leftist perspective to be against big pharma. And then we entered a COVID chapter and that whole thing flips. We've just gone through this whole political pole shift where now the left celebrates big pharma and the right is against it. It's just like, it's just maddening.
It's madness. It is madness, actually. It's gotten so insane out there. I mean, again, I'm hoping that this our website and this concept of spiritual populism can help people like get grounded again. Like, let's just, I was thinking about this in terms of the transgender issue, not to get too far off track, but it's like, I think men do have penises. Like, I think that's okay to think that, and you're not like a transphobe or an evil person or a horrible thing, or,
Right.
women do have vaginas and they give birth to children. And that's not a transphobic statement to make. Like, what's going on in the world where our political conversations are just so off the wall? Like,
Yeah.
it's like, take a step back, everybody, and be like, okay, that whatever we're doing is not working,
Yeah,
like,
no, it clearly isn't. Like, we can't just keep running down these roads, because it doesn't lead to anywhere good, sort of thing. And
yeah,
I only see it like, without some new vision, without some like new movement that can help like kind of reunify people, and like, kind of take a step back from a lot of this. I definitely worry about like where things are going, because and in the same way that I think a lot of people realize how we've been polarized through social media, whether intentionally or by unintentionally or by design, regardless of what the case may be. Like, that has been the results of like the social media algorithms and all that is driven bigger wedges between us, and like, driven
I
people
think
into
so.
their own bubbles. And that sort of thing is only going to get dramatically accelerated by like AI technology, for example. Right. And like, you think confirmation bias and like, people's ability to be in their own little echo chamber has been bad previously. Imagine with like all the technology that's coming out in terms of deep fakes, in terms of like, the capacity of language models to be able to create content that is specifically tailored for a certain person or perspective. And we're entering a world where like, where we could just be even further driven apart. And the consequences of that are growing as well. So we got to unify, people. we got to unify.
Yeah, we got to unify. We got to just get grounded back into a real world. I think they've really thrown, I feel like these days there are those of us who have just been looking at all the news sources that we can, who are able to find the primary sources out of the news sources, and then decide whether we think that the evidence is there for the beliefs that we have. But there just aren't a lot of people who take that time, and most people are typically just trusting a corporate or a government news source that is not giving them all the facts. And then I go out into the world and I realize, because I've been reading now independent media for such a long time, that when I talk to somebody that hasn't been looking at these, we can just go into all kinds of, they think that I'm reading misinformation, they think that I'm reading fake news. And I don't think they realize the time that I've put in to compare, my sources. I don't read news sources where the journalism sucks. I analyze it and I figure it out. And I figured out over and over again after a while that the corporate and government news sources were not telling the truth. And that individuals who are independent journalists typically are actually trying to find the truth and giving you the best, the best interpretation based on the facts that they can find. But people have got to get out of being manipulated by essentially what is propaganda, because so often I get out in the world now, like you're talking about, now people are getting on social media, but they've sort of picked their team.
Mm-hmm.
And they're only getting exposed now to the information that is confirming their bias.
Right.
And so, you get two people that disagree together these days, and it's like they're living in two different realities. They've had, they've been exposed to two different, so many of the, and I mean, with Trump coming on board, the populist movement then became this right-wing thing. I know that, like, I've become almost a begrudging Trump supporter. I don't want to be. I don't think he's a great guy. I actually think that he's what would be termed controlled opposition, that they've created this phenomenon of Trump in order to justify a lot of the censorship, and then in order to push the so-called populist movement or the conspiracy theorists that were getting so popular on the internet prior to Trump. They were able to push them into the right, try to identify them as far right, which is actually a tactic that's been used for decades to call populist historians and writers. I mean, even in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, they'd try to say those guys are fascists, those guys are white nationalists. Don't read that, you know. If you're thinking about like the Birch Society from the 60s, or there's a couple of other political writers, and not that, sure, you know, those guys maybe were typically identified themselves as conservative. But when you actually read their stuff, like, they're not Nazis, you know, like when you actually get into it, it's not.
Well, and the notion that populism itself is kind of, I'm not going to say it's like a complete oxymoron to be a populist fascist, but they usually don't really go together.
Yeah, right.
Again, going back to the notion of top-down approaches versus bottom-up approaches, like fascism is typically marked by top-down approaches to problems, right? Where, like, you know, like the government and corporations come together to dictate how things are supposed to go, right? As opposed to a populist who generally thinks that it should be decided by the people, by the free market, by people's ability to make their own decisions and act in their own best interest, and then kind of you know, deciding things based on what's adopted by the people, you know?
Yeah. It's interesting to think about how populism has been treated for a long time. I mean, I think that what I think is that even going back into the robber baron era in like the 1880s and 1890s, the populist movement then was actually the threat. It is the liberal threat to the elite corporate establishment. And so what you saw as the robber barons gained more power, and then they get their tax exempt foundations, and they get their Federal Reserve, which centralized the currency. They're starting to profit off of all the government spending, all the, you know, and they really solidified power. And that's when those very billionaire foundations started pushing the progressive movement. Because the corporations, the publishing houses, stopped publishing populist literature, and the populist literature became conspiracy theory, you know. And even in the 20s and 30s, it's not like there aren't historians who've written from this perspective. It's just that they were just buried, and they're not taught in the government schools, and, you know, their books aren't going to be sold in the corporate publishing houses. And so a lot of that information gets buried. And fortunately, these days we have some really good historians that are digging up a lot of their work. But it's not like the populist movement just went away. Although if you know, in your government school, you're going to get taught that, oh, by 1910, the populists were just dead, and the progressives had taken over, as theoretically those who are fighting the corporations or fighting for the working class. But why would the billionaire class fund a movement that was actually designed to destroy the billionaire class? Like, they're not doing that.
And they're sweating about it right now as we speak. I was watching little pieces of the World Economic Forum event, and what is it, February in Davos, and they were specifically mentioning several different times that, like, basically we're concerned about the rise of populism. We're seeing a rise of populism, and it's worrying, and we need to discuss how do we deal with that, because it's the same energy. Like, in some situations, it's some of the same people right? But in a lot of cases, it's just like it's the same energy, it's the same institutions that are now trying to centralize and power and resources, and that realize that, like, not only is populism a threat to what they want to do, but it's the complete antidote, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the unifying movement that takes everybody, if they can get their heads out of the left-right paradigm and they realize that populism isn't a bad word,
Yeah.
then it really provides the solutions, because it is a bottom-up, it's a grassroots movement.
Right.
And it requires decentralization, and it requires all these things that, I mean, these are the solutions from the populist perspective of allowing these centralized power structures to control all of our lives. And we can live in a world like that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're walking right into another beautiful example. Earlier I mentioned crypto as like a bottom up solution, right? Whereas right now we're seeing the establishment and these globalists and the government pushing for CBDCs, the central bank digital currencies.
Yeah.
Which are basically like they're pushed forward as if they are like cryptocurrencies, but they're actually nothing like cryptocurrency, in the sense that, like, cryptocurrencies, and not all of them are decentralized, but the essence of them, and, like, the original purpose was to offer decentralized digital currencies, right? That were immutable, that that are transparent, to the point where you can know that that you're not being gamed. You can know exactly what's happening in the big picture, and
Right.
And all of that, versus a central bank digital currency, which is the complete opposite, right? You're talking about centralized currencies that, rather than a cryptocurrency, which isn't owned by any individual or any organization, these central bank digital currencies will be, government property. And honestly, like, you'll have, in the same way that you think like the dollars in your account are yours, and then they mostly are, right? But at the same time, there's some concerns, like if your account can just be shut down and your money can be seized, like, is it actually yours, right? And some people would argue that it's not. Well, central bank digital currencies take that in a whole different level. Like, it's just that much more controlled than even our fiat funny money is, right? Because they'll have like programmatic control over the currency at a, like, very, very minute level. Like, where for example, say they don't want you buying eggs this week, right? Because there's like an egg shortage, or there's been avian flu, or this and that, right? They can disable your ability to spend your money on eggs. It's mind blowing. They can turn off your money. They can basically put you on allowance with your own money, and allow you to spend X amount per week, or just whatever they want to do. They'll have complete control over how you use your currency, not even to mention anything about the surveillance aspect of it and how it connects to, like, social credit systems. So yeah, it's just a good way to help paint a different picture of, like, what a bottom-up populist approach looks like versus a top-down centralized authoritarian and fascist approach.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the decentralized systems, it's almost like when we were talking about last week, I think, a little bit, the how to build the infrastructure for a decentralized internet, so you don't have the Google monster that controls all the information that goes through the internet, which is by nodes, and you have multiple nodes that make up the system. Even if you take one node out, the whole system still functions, and every node has a piece of the puzzle. But unless you can put all of the nodes together, then you can never see the whole puzzle. And so no one person ever controls the whole system, which is how a lot of cryptocurrencies are produced. And that's why they're protective of your data. And once you get a hold of it, then that is yours in perpetuity to spend as you will. But the centralized digital currencies, like you're saying, it's a whole different monster. I mean, one person, one entity is manufacturing the whole chain, and so it can see the whole chain, and it knows what's going on the whole chain, and it can program the chain or the individual blocks on the chain. So there's a big yin and yang in terms of the practical applications of this blockchain technology. And going into the future, we're all going to have to be real careful. I think it was actually David Icke wrote a little article last week about the IMF coming online with their central bank digital currency.
Yeah.
So at the top of the central banking hierarchy, they've already getting this online. I think we've got what is it called? The Fed
now.
Yeah. I think they're wanting to get that online by this July. So it's all coming right up. It's all happening as we speak.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it really is. I know there's it's not Fed now, but I think there's some bill that they're trying to get through by May that's going to kind of lay the groundwork for a lot of this. And like I'm sure the Restrict Act is going to play. I mean, if they can get the Restrict Act through, is going to play a big part in all of this. For those that don't know, the Restrict Act, people are calling it like the Patriot Act 2.0. It's the bill that's supposed to ban TikTok, and effectively the bill would do that, but it doesn't even mention TikTok in the bill. It does far more, and it's far reaching. It's extremely vague. It basically gives them the ability to be able to look at any. They use the term transaction, right? But when they use the term transaction in this bill, they mean like it could be any sort of like a download of an app, any interaction you have on an app, or any actual transaction they can use to basically like justify their need to surveil you, right? And so things like banning TikTok. If you were able to use a VPN, like a lot of people would try to do to access TikTok anyway, you could be like fined $1 million and jailed for I don't even remember how many years, but it's just really absurd.
Wow.
There's just so many crazy things to go over about that, and maybe we will do that like next time there's like a news story about it if it reaches the next level. But I guess part of the reason I just wanted to mention it is just how it connects with this notion of CBDCs and just this extreme level of tyranny and surveillance that it represents. And when you pair a CBDC with something like the Restrict Act, it basically just gives them the ability to like for anything that you do online that they don't like, that they can control your money, and they can turn off your ability to be able to transact. So you better not be posting any misinformation on Facebook.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's getting to that point where people really need to have concerns about what the next 5 years are going to be like, because the control systems, the technology has gotten to a place where the control systems that they're laying down right now will create a kind of a world that was only in science fiction movies, just a few years ago. I mean, it's hard to believe.
I know.
But the technology that's coming down the pike is going to be very controlling. All of this stuff is going to be linked to your social credit score, which is going to be linked to your CBDC. So, they pass the Resist Act, then they're checking everything on your social media. And then when you say the wrong things, your social credit score goes down, and then your CBDC gets cut off, or you can't buy no more cigarettes for you or whatever.
Yeah.
No more beer for you.
It is absolutely insane. And like, you're 1,000% right. And you just reminded me of another big story that's just kind of breaking in the last few days. Let me see if I can actually just show a quick little video of this, because along the lines of what you're talking about, like, it being sci-fi and us just get into a whole different level of technology. It's just terrifying. I'm not sure if you saw, but New York is now starting to deploy the Boston Dynamics robots. They're calling them the DigiDog.
Yeah. Have you seen the new ones with the head that goes up?
Oh, yeah,
it's like a little velociraptor.
Yeah. Hold on.
My God, you guys.
I'm about to screen share this, because like if you haven't seen this, you just gotta. Okay, like, here we go.
Let's do it.
So check this out. So this is what they're calling the DigiDog. I'm sure a lot of people have seen these Boston Dynamics robots over the years. They've been around for maybe almost a decade by now,
Yeah.
and just have gradually gotten better and better. But they're actually deploying these things in New York now.
Right.
Apparently, they tried to roll them out 2 years ago, and they decided that there was so much pushback, they decided to just like hold off and just like put it on the back burner.
Yeah.
But they've decided now is the time, and so they're pushing it through.
Right.
And what's the mayor's name? Eric.
Yeah.
I'm having a brain fart on what the guy's name is. I forget. Mayor of so Eric, whatever his last name is. He's just deciding that now is the time, and so that they're going to do it regardless of what people think. And so they're deploying these DigiDogs, and they're coming out and doing these press conferences and claiming that look, we're this is only going to be used in extreme situations, and
I know.
And they're not going to be weaponized in any way, shape, or form. But you know how the slippery slope goes. I mean, give them 3 years and they'll have a machine gun.
Well, that's just it. Yeah, they were trying to do this in San Francisco just recently, and I think it was just like you're talking about, like they're just a few years behind New York, so they push it out there, and then they get the public pushback, and they go, "Oh no, we won't do that." But next year they'll try again until they get it.
Yeah,
and that's, I mean, God, people, do you understand this? That this is how the government corporate complex works. Yeah. They just implement social controls. Whatever they want the future to look like is what it's going to look like. They're not making these decisions in Washington, D.C. at the House of Representatives. They're manufacturing, really the future is manufactured probably at DARPA with the military guys who are building those robots.
Yeah.
And then they get pushed out once the technology becomes dual use technology. And the corporations start to push it out, and then they say, this is your future, here's what you're going to get. And we're not making these choices from the bottom up. It's something that's being driven from the top down, and what they're going to push on us is a total control grid. And you're seeing it now. But the thing about it is that, when they sort of push on humanity, and then they get some pushback, and what do we call it? The totalitarian tiptoe.
Yeah.
And then they'll keep going, and they'll keep going. And it's always, I mean, like COVID was a huge push. It was a big step, not just a tiptoe, because they were able to kind of see, well, where are the people at now? Well, can we lock them down for months at a time? Can we keep them from going to church? Oh yeah, we can. How far can we push them before they'll rebel against this stuff? And then they get to that line, and then they ease off a little bit, but then 6 months later they'll try again until it happens. And now in New York they're bringing it back, and you got robot dogs on the streets, and
then a few years down the line, your money is being cut off because a robot dog saw you jaywalking.
Yeah, right? Yeah, exactly.
And now you can't buy dinner.
Oh man, we're laughing about it, but it's like, people got to do something, because this is terrible. Exactly what they're building right in front of our faces.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
it's pretty shocking.
Well, and maybe we should kind of go full circle and sort of connect all of this to what the whole January 6th thing, just to kind of get back around it, and the Dominion lawsuit, and now that it's getting settled, and we're not going to get to see all of the information about how Dominion works, because I just think that, like, the system is so dysfunctional, and certainly if the election systems don't work, then we're not going to find solutions to any of these problems. I mean, it's by sowing this confusion, and then, like, do they even have to control the election processes so much when they can censor or control the narrative, so much so that what we think we're voting on are even issues that maybe probably aren't even really the important issues.
Right.
I mean, they're certainly like able to sort of steer the ship of public opinion.
Well, yeah, and I mean, like, to that point, like, it kind of connects back to how I was pointing out how the left are now basically calling anybody that questions the 2020 election deniers, when previously they were the deniers and all that.
Right.
It just it makes me think about how, like, during the Russiagate situation, the whole argument was that Russia has been running social media campaigns that have, like, that help steer the narrative, right? And so that was their argument. It wasn't even that Russia hacked the voting systems as much. I mean, maybe there was a component of that.
Yeah, I don't think they ever did claim that. I think it was all about
it was all about.
apparently the Russian propaganda controlled the narrative.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So not only are they acknowledging that capability that somebody could steer the narrative using social media
Right.
campaigns, right? Now you're talking about, like, I mean, look, we knew it was happening in terms of the censorship and the steering and the manufacturing of consent and the propaganda that was going on and the shaping of the narrative while it was happening. But with things like the Twitter files that are being released, that show the extent to which Twitter suppressed voices on the right.
Yeah.
So help suppress the Hunter Biden story and all of these sorts of things that happen, like, that are just even like levels worse than what the Russians were claimed to have done in 2016, right? And we know for a fact that these social media companies have done this. So is that not election interference?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's just the thing. It's like we know that our own government has been engaging in a hardcore election interference. The Hunter Biden laptop story is enough in and of itself, and there's just a mountain of evidence that shows, collusion between government and corporate actors to push that story down when they knew that it was a real laptop and they knew that it had real information on it.
Right.
And they did everything they could to suppress that literally right before the election.
Well, and the thing is,
I mean, that
me,
should be
like,
a big news story.
it should be the hugest news story.
Yeah.
And like, I know some people have tried to make it a huge news story, but, like, no, this still needs to be one of the most, like, talked about news stories, like, of the decade, because this is, to me, this story is not just like some inconsequential like scandal that might have shaped the election a little bit had it been talked about, right? To me, it's not just that. To me, like, this is one of the most consequential things to have happen, because, look, I don't know what exactly is going on behind the scenes. And I know not many of us, like, very few people do know, right? But, like, a lot of what was on Hunter Biden's laptop involved his dealings with the energy companies in Ukraine,
Exactly.
for example, right? The company that the Burisma, the company that he's on the board of,
right?
And that whole scandal, and talking about they were making a deal, and that they had to include 10% for the big guy. Which was clearly Joe Biden. So you have Hunter Biden, with no experience in the energy industry, being put on the board of this energy company called Burisma, like, and in this scenario where Ukraine had already been, like, known for its corruption, and this company in particular was being investigated for corruption while Hunter Biden was on the board. And so Joe Biden basically threatened the judge that was, like, kind of
it was the quid pro quo.
It was the quid pro quo. I know, exactly. It's like the judge is overseeing this whole case, and, like, and so okay. So anyway, without getting too much into that whole story, because that could be its whole own exploration. My point is just that now, after Joe Biden is actually in office and acting as president, we, lo and behold, find ourselves in this situation where we have this war that we're engaging in with Ukraine and Russia. And it's just like, what's going on behind the scenes there, and how related is this war to the dealings that the Bidens had?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, clearly there's information on that laptop that may expose, like, quite a bit of corruption around the entire Ukraine situation. I mean, I think it probably just blows the whole thing out of the water, actually. That's why it's so amazing to me that this is what I mean at the beginning when I was like, I really don't want to be anything like a Trump supporter. But I just think it's almost if it wasn't so tragic, it's comic at how much they accused, when Trump said, I don't want to give you money because I'm afraid there's too much corruption in Ukraine and I want you to investigate the corruption, then they impeached him for that. Like, that was an impeachable quid pro quo, apparently. But when Biden, as vice president, said, I'm not going to give you this money unless you stop investigating the corruption in Ukraine, which to me is like, why would he do that? Like, that doesn't make a lot of sense unless maybe the, $50,000 a month from Burisma that Hunter's making on the side there, you don't really want to look into that too deeply, Joe. I mean, and then he brags about it in the front of there's videos. There's a video of him at the Council on Foreign Relations just bragging about it. I told him, stop this or else I'm not giving you this money,
Yeah.
And people don't get the double standard. I mean, that's just what kind of like boggles my mind. Look, for me, I just, because right now in this day, in this second, like I feel like, again, I think of Trump more as controlled opposition. I think they're manufacturing this story as a way of kind of engineering us and getting us to follow red herrings and not really focusing on the real changes. But nonetheless, and I don't want to get caught up in the left-right paradigm because I seem like a right-winger. I mean, when George Bush was president, to me, it was like George Bush and Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld. I mean, those guys are war criminals. Like back for those 8 years, if you were talking to me, you would have thought I was a flaming liberal. So I'm not trying to support Trump here necessarily, but these days, like, it seems to me around the 2016 election, the DNC exposed itself as the level of corruption, I think, flip-flopped, where I always thought the Republicans were the most corrupt party. In 2016, the Democrats seem to reveal themselves as even more corrupt than the Republican Party, and the level of corruption is just simply astounding at this point, to where it's just like you can't help. I mean, and when I talk to Democrats, I'm always astounded. Like, aren't you disappointed in how corrupt your organization is? And don't you think you should try to stop that behavior?
Don't you see what they did to Bernie? Like, don't you see what they did to Bernie?
See?
Like, you had a reasonable shot of having like somebody look, and I kind of saw through Bernie at the time. But I mean, like, he would have been dramatically better. Look, I don't agree with most of his politics, but he would have been dramatically better than either Trump or Biden.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell the difference between people who are real people. Even if I would much rather have a real person in office than one of these corporate lackeys, or one of these clearly some kind of Frankenstein out of this military industrial complex. They prop up these guys so they can push for what they want, and you're getting basically a front man for this, corporate government complex, as I call it, and that's all it is. It's not real. They never fulfill their campaign promises that but at least Bernie was like a real guy, and even if I didn't agree with him, I would rather see an actual real person trying to do. I mean, I'd love to see an election between Bernie Sanders and Ron Paul, right? I mean, that kind of thing. Like, that would be a real actual election, not like
that would have been a dream.
Too corporate, if you're going to do the left-right paradigm, then just do it and have Bernie Sanders debate with Ron Paul and see what happens, right? I mean, but as it is, because the system is corrupted, Ron Paul got cheated out of his Republican primary, and then you see Bernie Sanders get cheated out of the Democratic primary, and it was just, I mean, the system is completely broken.
Yeah,
it's phenomenal. And this kind of even gets us back. I just like to go full circle to the election integrity question again, just to kind of create some cohesiveness around the podcast.
This is like, a figure.
Yeah.
It's been the core thread that we've returned to.
I'm trying to be a little bit linear instead of completely stream of consciousness with our production here, but
for sure.
But I mean, it was the same. It was just the same situation with these primaries, where these both the Republican and the Democratic National Committee, I mean, they have these primaries, and people think they're voting and that their vote counts, but it really doesn't, especially in the primaries. I mean, the primaries, if you look at the fine print, they don't even claim that your vote matters. Like, they have these primaries, but then they completely reserve the right to just choose at the conventions whoever they want to run. It doesn't matter who you voted for in the primaries. That the whole thing is just a joke.
Level after level.
But I think I told you last week, even the person that was running the exit polls for that primary, for that Democratic primary, they quit like 2/3 of the way through, because all the exit polls kept saying that Bernie was winning just consistently. And then all of a sudden it was just, no, Hillary won. The election machines told us. It must be true.
Must be true.
Don't be an election denier.
But yeah, I mean, you're so right with the point you made earlier about, like, you know, look, there's just levels to this. You know, there's the actual machines themselves, which do have problems. But it's like, do they even need to exploit that when they have control over the narrative? That's a whole different level. And then control of the narrative, like, really comes at a different level, even than, you know, their ability to be able to control who gets in, right? So it's like they control who gets in the first place, and then they can control the entire narrative around that, and then they presumably could have control over the machines themselves.
Right.
So
yeah, I mean, it's when you want to talk about a real democracy, I even have questions about can we live in a democratic society if we have a government-run education system? I mean, come on, right? If everybody's getting educated the same way by the government, then how in the hell are these people educated by the government going to be able to objectively vote on government policies when they've only heard, you know, the problems and the solutions and even how to think about the problems and the solutions from the government? I mean,
exactly. There's a moment I will never forget in my life that I'm so appreciative for. And I don't know how much of a mark it made on me at the time. Maybe it did, but I'll just never forget it. I was in 10th grade. And I was in a history class, and I had this teacher named Mr. Monahan, whose name and face I'll never forget. And I should reach out to him at some point, because this is, you know, 20 years ago, whatever the case might be. And I still remember this day. But, you know, I really appreciated him so much because I never liked history before I had him as a teacher. Because this guy, he would talk about history like it was Game of Thrones or something like that. The level of passion that he put into the storytelling, it was just, man, he just had me enthralled. And so anyway, I also just appreciated this one day. He's teaching us about, like, you know, how in Soviet Russia and in and Mussolini's Italy, how, like, they deployed, you know, like, propaganda and brainwashed their students and this and that. And, like, you know, it was just this whole lesson about how government-run propaganda led to these fascist states.
Yeah.
And so as he's, like, you know, schooling us on all this, I raised my hand. I, like, legitimately asked him, like, Professor Monahan, how do we know this isn't happening to us? And he just looked me dead in the eye and said, "We don't."
Yeah.
And that was just it. And then he just carried on.
Yeah.
he didn't try to sugarcoat it or anything. He just, "We don't." And there was just this pause. I'll never forget that moment. I'll always appreciate that time a teacher kept it real with me. And to your point, we don't know that. I mean, in fact, now I think we know that it is happening. And so it's like, I agree with you. How can you have, I mean, that is manufacturing consent at its core.
Right.
How can you have a legitimate consent when your ability to be able to explore ideas and to be able to think for yourself is being undermined by state-run propaganda, you know?
Yeah, I actually think because most history is taught from the left-right paradigm, and then you'll have, like, if you do history on a college level, it'll be like you'll be reading the same event, and then you'll read, like, the socialist guy's version of those events, and then the capitalist guy's versions of those events. And then anything outside, this is kind of interesting. I've thought about this. Anything outside of that left-right paradigm is called revisionist history because it's different than what almost everybody reports history from this left-right paradigm. And I actually think, what we've been calling conspiracy theory now since the Kennedy assassination, basically, should have always been called populist revisionist history, because it's the history from outside the left-right paradigm. It uses this top-down paradigm, and it does tell the story from this perspective of like how basically the strong are dominating the weak, but not from the perspective that it's just an economic force like the Marxists try to tell you. Well, it's just, this is just what happens, these natural developments from capitalism to communism through historical forces. But from the populist perspective, it's because the people on the top are criminals, right? They're immoral people that are just actually screwing us all over. That's why they don't want us to hear the populist perspective, because it actually busts them for, doing illegal shit, just like the Biden laptop, right?
Exactly. And for rigging the system, like the Federal Reserve.
Yeah. I mean, that's just it. And so who knows what's really going on with the election systems? I mean, at the end of the day, it's kind of like this was the point of the conversations that we're having about the election systems need to be about the integrity of the election system, not about whether we've proved that an election was rigged or not. Because once an election is rigged, it's almost impossible to prove that it was. I mean, you just can't tell. Nobody's going to give you a smoking gun where they're like, oh yeah, here's where I, shuffled in 50,000 votes or whatever. And without that, like I said, you can do all the recounts in the world and you're always going to get the same result. So it's about election integrity. And one of the things that I've looked up, and this again, like when you take a step back from the conversations that are like, no, there's no evidence and you're an election denier, or from, oh, my guy Trump won and you're a fascist, or whatever, these arguments that we're having. When you take a step back and you just say, well, how do real election integrity activists actually analyze elections? And you discover that, I looked this up because I was curious. I think it's 90% of democracies in the world, basically only 10% of democracies in the world use electronic voting machines, because 90% of them have concerns about their integrity, right? You can hack them, you can get in and you can figure it out, and it's hard to catch. And so they don't use it. And then it was 85%, only 15% of democracies in the world use mail-in ballots in the way that the United States has now started using them, which is the big issue. A lot of them have ballots for people who are disabled, or
dead.
If you can prove that you're
there were literally votes that got in from people that were dead.
I mean, that's an actual real problem. And then when you talk about the voter rolls, purging the voter rolls, you'll get people telling you that you're a racist because you're trying to purge African Americans from the voter rolls. But it's like, we got to clean these things up somehow, right? You've got to be double checking, because dead people do vote way too often, and that's clearly something's going on there.
Absolutely. That, and the fact that, like, the way they've kind of like left the southern border just open, sort of thing, right?
Sure.
I'm sure you have a lot of people that are coming in and who are voting without actually being citizens, right?
I mean, that's starting to happen too, and it's crazy. I'll tell you what happened to me. I moved to Iowa from California, and during the last election, 2022, I got my mail-in ballot from California in the mail, and I could have voted from California. And you just have to wonder, how often does that happen? I mean, who's keeping track of this kind of stuff? I mean, that happened to me. I could have voted twice, and nobody would have known the wiser. And if I wanted to organize something like that, like if I had access to some data and knew that all the people that were leaving California, I mean, 100,000 people moved from California last year. And so, if I can figure out who those people are, and I can take advantage of that loophole, that lack of integrity in the system, and I can, end up casting that vote, that can make a huge difference. And who knows the ways that people have figured out to fix elections. I mean,
I mean,
I don't do it as a full-time
there's
profession.
ballot harvesting too. I mean, like, you know,
Yeah.
there was a lot of people that were caught doing that in the last election, you know, basically being able to go to people and, you know, like basically buying their ballots off of them.
Well,
and being
that's
able to dump in large amounts, you know.
I mean, that's just
People
the
that
thing
had
about
no intention of voting at all, but like, oh, you offered them, you know, $50. So
I mean, the whole, that's the thing about the mail-in ballot thing. I mean, the Democrats or whatever, I mean, they've turned it into this left-right issue. So it's the Democrats that think this, but it could just as easily be the Republican. You know, it's like on the left-right paradigm of things. I don't know, but the Democrats have decided en masse to think that, you know, oh, it's just making it easy for people to vote. And if you disagree with this, you're a racist, which I don't understand why everybody like I know has an ID. Like, what is this concept that some people, because of their skin tone, have a hard time getting an ID? Like,
I have no clue.
I assume you have an ID, Leandrew. I mean,
no, I don't, but I thought I was an anomaly.
Well, you're just one of those that doesn't want to have an ID. I'd like to burn my IDs too.
Yeah.
And I wish we didn't have to vote on any of this crap, but
seriously. Yeah, no, you're right. I really have no clue where this comes from. Where's this notion come from that, like, you know, like minorities can't get IDs or something like that? It's just like, it's so puzzling.
Yeah. I mean, most democracies really do. You got to go to the voting place and you have to show an ID so that you can prove that you're a citizen so you can vote. And that's just because that's that's the system that has the highest level of integrity. With the mail-in ballots, the chain of custody, as soon as they mail it out, they don't know who it gets to. And so chain of custody is broken, and they try to solve it with the signature thing.
Yeah.
But then how do you double check the signature? And even, you know, people are like, oh, those cyber ninja guys in Arizona, they didn't find anything there. You're just an election denier. You're a crazy person. And it's like, well, when you look at what they did analyze, I mean, I think what I saw was something like, you know, there were tens of thousands of signatures that didn't match up. Right. That could have been anything. So, and who knows, did somebody fake it because they were fixing a ballot, or did somebody just squiggle their signature and it didn't look like the other one on their driver's license? I don't even know how they compare them.
I got to be honest. I don't know how much more of that sort of stuff I can tolerate. I feel like when the 2024 election comes around, if Trump wins and if the left starts screaming about the election was rigged and stolen, I'm probably going to bomb it.
Yeah. I mean, the bottom line is it really goes back to, as we were saying before, if people cared about election integrity, there are professionals out there that, you know, one thing, this is something that nobody in the United States knows. But for example, there are international organizations that places like Russia and Syria always have these groups of international observers come to observe their elections. And they grade the election process, and they tell the country, you know, where they have holes, where they have problems, and what they need to do to strengthen their election systems. In the United States, we don't allow any foreign observers to come into the country here. So we don't know what our grade would be.
Yeah.
But those are the kinds of things, like, and that's something that to me is like, isn't that a red flag that we won't allow these organizations in to even check this out? I mean, there are people who are professional election integrity activists that could tell you how to run an election. Oh, I was going to bring this up. And these are the kinds of things, guys, that are going to be on the page of the Spiritual Populist, like in the next week, I promise, because we're so close to streamlining how we're going to do it. But I'm collecting all of this. I am collecting lots of articles every day, and very soon I'll be posting these every day up onto the website. But this particular one really caught my attention, and it's at redovoting.com. Yeah, maybe, I don't know if you can pop that up and screen share it. This might be a kind of a good way to conclude this episode, because we're getting towards the end of it, and it's sort of like we've been weaving this theme. We can spend another 10 minutes maybe focusing on this particular solution, but this was something that came up on my Twitter feed last week, redovoting.com. And these guys look like they got a pretty solid system, of how to do it, how to make it happen, how to make it secure and safe. Like, there are intelligent people. Yeah, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
There are very intelligent people that have developed these systems. And you know what happens when you go to your government and you say, hey, I've got this really tight way to run an election. Do you want to do this? They just get blown off.
Yeah.
And it's you can't explain why. Like, if we really wanted to solve this election integrity problem, I mean, let's imagine that there's not a problem with the US election systems right now, but the fact that basically half the country is freaked out, worried that there is in and of itself a problem, right? Like, how, what can we do to ensure to that half of the population that the elections are secure? And we should be having this open conversation about what does it mean to have a secure election, and what can we do to improve the election integrity of our system. And it's something that can always be improved upon, even like it, like these kinds of conversations should be normal and commonplace. And it shouldn't be like, oh my God, you're worried about the electronic voting machines. You're just an election denier. You're an insurrectionist. I mean,
it's complete nonsense.
Yeah.
And they act like, oh yeah, questioning the elections is dangerous to our democracy. Oh, that phrase that is probably one of the most parroted phrases in this entire world right now. A danger to our democracy.
Yeah.
But they act like it's a danger to our democracy. Well, and you know what? Actually, I think your avoidance of dealing with this issue and like creating or bringing forth a legitimate solution that can just ease everybody's mind about this, I think that's a danger to quote unquote our democracy.
Right. I mean, that's just it. That's what I mean about, like, I've gotten to this place where I don't think it's about having logical conversation anymore. I really think that it's about, like, we're in a toxic relationship with, Republicans and Democrats it's a toxic relationship. And all of us really are in a toxic relationship with this government corporate complex that's just spewing this nonsense at us. That's actually really ultimately responsible for these divide and conquer tactics. And now it feels like we've gotten so far outside of even just reality that we're not, like, we can't have reasonable conversations without thinking that the other side is some kind of like evil demon or something.
Yeah.
I mean, just not paying attention.
Yeah, no, so true. I'm curious, do you know much about how this works?
If I'd have known that we were going to kind of talk about it, I would have looked at it a little bit more closely. I did read the Twitter feed when they posted the link where they answered a number of questions about, what they think about different aspects of elections and election problems. And it was basically the same, a lot of the same stuff that I'd heard in the past. The machines are hackable. The chain of custody issues with the mail-in ballots, they do cause these integrity issues. And so they were saying that their system has figured out how to get around a lot of that. But I didn't actually delve into exactly what it is. But it would be worth it to do that, because I just kind of realized when I stumbled upon it, and I have done interviews with other election integrity activists in the past, that professionals really do know, these are the things we should be having a national conversation about with these professionals.
Right.
and so we should all know, redo voting should be on MSNBC and on Fox News, and they should be talking about, the things that we could do to improve our election integrity. And then Americans would actually be having a real conversation. Do we want to do that? Does that make sense to us? Which system is the best for us? I mean, those are real conversations. It's not this like, you're an election denier, and then I mean, I don't even know what I think about the people that just seem to have the utmost faith in the current system, because I don't see a lot to have faith in
It's
about.
like
But
the bar is so low by this point that, like,
right,
even as you're just sitting there and talking about this, I'm just imagining how much of a utopia it sounds like, that we could, like, just come together as a nation and, like, look, we have this problem, and somebody could bring forth a solution. I'm like, okay, is this the best solution we got? Okay, let's try it, right?
yeah,
Like, rather than like fighting
and
about it
then
for 4 years and then not doing anything, and then
yeah,
like just fucking switching roles the next time somebody else wins, and now this side is complaining about it, and it just like it just is maddening. Like,
well, I mean, think about the news cycle. Like, when was the last time something happened that was huge in the news for months, and
right,
then the problem was solved? Did the problem get solved?
oh
Or
right,
did the
right,
news cycle just move on? Like, it just
yeah,
moved on, and the same
yeah,
problem's still there, and nobody
yeah.
ever figured it out, and nothing ever
Never figured it
happened.
out.
And it's just like, why was that even in the news? If you're not going to work on making things better, I mean, it's just amazing. I
So
think that's
yeah, it just reminds me of this a thing I know I said to you off the air, but like, sometimes I think about how much, again, people, like you were saying, have faith in the system and have faith in politicians, right? And I think
yeah,
about to myself, like, when's the last time a politician has done anything that has made my life better, right? And look, to try to answer that for yourself, but also that with a caveat, right? When's the last time a politician did anything that made your life better that wasn't undoing a previous action of a politician or government?
right.
Right. So don't say like, oh yeah, we open up, after lockdowns or whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Because I mean,
yeah,
it's like,
right.
okay, they took something off of us that they did and to us in the first place. It should have never happened.
Right.
Okay, so when's the last time a politician actually just did something that just really benefited your life? So tell me that. Now, in contrast, when's the last time an entrepreneur did something that benefited your life?
Yeah.
Right. And it's like almost endless by comparison, right? Almost every problem that people run into in their day-to-day life, there's somebody out there trying to build some business or some product or some service
Right.
that solves it, right? And
Yeah.
so we just continue to like ram our heads against the walls, relying on politicians to solve the biggest problems in society when I can't name a single one that they have
Yeah.
solved.
I
What
know.
how do we misplace our energy like that, you know?
It actually puts that whole sort of mantra, the old conspiracy theory concept of problem, reaction, solution, that they're really just feeding us these problems and then manufacturing our reactions so that they can present the solution. Here's the new vaccine that's going to help you out,
But
or what,
at
here's the new surveillance system that we've created to help you out with this problem that we just told you
exactly.
about or pushed through the mainstream media. And that's really what's happening, because you're totally right. I mean, again, like, take that step back and look and go, when did this government system ever do anything that
Mhm.
really solved a problem for me, that really helped me out, that I was having an issue in my life, and then the government changed something, and my God, suddenly things were better? It's like, it
Yeah.
just never happens.
I was gonna chime in with a specific example that'll get us kicked off YouTube already.
Yeah, right. I
But let's
know.
just say, like, and the solution that they offer and this Hegelian dialectic rarely ever is the solution to the problem they present, right? I
Yeah.
mean, if anything, it's the solution to getting them more power and more money, because that's the actual problem that they're trying to solve. Like, we need more
Well,
power
that's
and more
just
money. How
it,
do we
right?
solve it, right? And then they give us the solution that does that, but the solution doesn't actually fix the problem
Yeah.
that we've been presented with, like
Yeah.
a specific example that I won't mention.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, again, we're living in this top-down situation, and we have to figure out how to dismantle these power structures. There's actually, hopefully, one of the first things that'll come up if we can get our website going here in the next couple of days. I just found, oh, what are they called? The world. Oh, gosh, it's slipping my mind right now. But okay, the World Council for Health. Fortunately, I have it right here. And these guys have just come out with like a 45-page policy brief called "Rejecting Monopoly Power Over Public Health," because now we're concerned about the World Health Organization coming out with this huge centralizing the healthcare systems across the world. So when they say there's a pandemic, then everybody has to lock down. So they're continuing to centralize power onto these higher and higher levels, and they're building this world government, which is going to be able to control when they do pull these problem reaction solution shenanigans. It's going to be worldwide, and it's going to come from these worldwide organizations like the United Nations and the World Health Organization and this new pandemic treaty that they're working on. So we'll have that analysis coming out on our website here in the next couple of days. But this World Council for Health, they've actually come out with like a I don't know how to pronounce it, naticanase, this Japanese herb, apparently that's really good at detoxing the spike protein. So they've got a great product out there, and we're going to try to help promote their stuff. And hopefully you'll be able to get that. The document is long and complicated, but we'll provide a summary on the website, so you'll be able to get at least the major ideas in it posted there very shortly. All right, looks like we're at 90 minutes.
Yep. We did it. We
did it. We managed to make it happen. It's not, once we get rolling, it's not too challenging.
No. Well, thank you guys for joining us again here on episode 2 of the Spiritual Populist. And we're looking forward to having you on this journey with us. And, especially as we continue to kind of refine the message and what it means to be a spiritual populist, and help, co-create that with you guys. Thank you for joining us. I'm excited to be here with you, and looking forward to what we can build in the future, because again, it's time to unify.
Right on. All right, thanks everybody for checking this out, and I'll just remind you that you can either take a photo of the QR code in the top corner of the screen, or you can go to www.thespiritualpopulist.com and sign up for the newsletter right now. So we'll get the information out to you right away as soon as we go live. I'm hoping that's going to happen in the next couple of days, in which case, if you check it out after that, then you'll see all the week's news posted right there with solid summarization, so you don't have to read everything, but also links to the primary documents. So if you feel interested, you can take deeper dives. We're trying to make your research easier and make it a one-stop shop for everybody to find the news that they want from the spiritual populist point of view. So check it out, sign up for the newsletter so you can stay tuned, and we'll see you again next week.
Take it easy, guys.
Take it easy.